We're going to end our week traveling down the biblical highway, Route 66, by looking at a beautiful story of Ruth. Judges is the most tragic book in all the Bible, perhaps, but Ruth is perhaps the most beautiful. And the interesting thing is Ruth takes place during the time of the Judges. While most people were doing what was right in their own eyes, and we see these absolutely horrendous stories in the book of Judges, we find that not everybody was living like that. There was a group of people, there were a remnant of God who lived for Him, who followed Him, who loved Him, who worshiped Him. And the book of Ruth, only 4 little chapters, tell one of those stories. The storyline goes like this. One of the main characters, Naomi, and her family, her husband, her 2 sons, flee Israel during a time of great famine. And they go to the neighboring country of Moab, a pagan country nearby, and they end up staying there 10 years. They should have come back, but they didn't, so they stayed there 10 years. And finally, her husband, Naomi's husband, and both of her sons, who had been by then married, also died. They all died. And so Naomi is destitute. She has no one to take care of her, so she tries to go back home to Israel. And Ruth, her daughter-in-law, who had married one of her sons, a Moabitess, decides that she'd go home with Naomi and take care of her. And she did that. And so we come back to Israel, and they go back to where the family and the clan had been. And Ruth is doing everything within her power to take care of Naomi. Both these women were very much destitute. They had no men to take care of them. They had no money. They had virtually nothing except Ruth's ability to go out and work in the fields where it was possible. And so they were in a bad way. And so as they come back to the land there, the storyline picks up with Ruth and a man named Boaz. It just so happened, of course, by the providence of God, that Ruth runs into a very godly man, extremely godly man, by the name of Boaz. And he seems to be wealthy. He owns some fields and so forth, and he needs workers, day workers who would come in and glean. And Ruth picks up a job. It's a hard job. It's hard work. But she's willing to do that, and no complaining from Ruth. She's taking care of herself and her mother-in-law. And Boaz notices her attitude and notices how hard she's working, and he takes a shine to her. He appreciates her. And ultimately, as the story goes on, the two get married. It's an interesting story, not the dating life that we know today, but it was a story in which now Boaz and Ruth get married, and they'll have a child at the end. But that's not the main storyline. The main storyline wraps around the Hebrew word goel. The word goel is a word that it could be translated kinsman redeemer. And God has set up a very special program to take care of widows and others who are destitute in Israel. And that is that a close relative could buy back property of another close relative who had to sell it because of poverty. And they would buy it back for that family. Or if a widow had lost their husband and they had no children, the kinsman redeemer would marry this woman and raise children in the name of the deceased husband. And that was the kinsman redeemer. Our key word in this book then is redeemer, because that is the storyline of a redeemer who would come and would rescue Naomi and Ruth. And so that's our story, the Redeemer. Now, of course, that points directly to the ultimate Redeemer, Jesus Christ, who had come to buy us back from sin and to give us a life in Him. And so we have a beautiful picture of what Christ would do for us in the story of Ruth and Naomi. Our key verse then is all the way back in chapter 4, verse 4. And the women said to Naomi, "Blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a Redeemer today, and may His name become famous in Israel." So let's make this part our theme verse and memorize this if you would. Blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a Redeemer today. And we are truly blessed if we are not left without a Redeemer, if we have ourselves a Redeemer, if Christ is our Redeemer, who has bought us back from sin and has set us free in Him. One little interesting tidbit before we quit on this today is in the Hebrew arrangement of the Bible. The book of Ruth is not found where it is here after Judges. It is found right after the book of Proverbs. And if you know Proverbs, the last chapter in Proverbs is what we call the story of the virtuous woman. this godly woman that is described in that chapter. And right after chapter 31 of Proverbs is the book of Ruth. As if to say, do you want an example of the virtuous woman? Do you want to know what a woman is like that excels in the eyes of God? Here it is, Ruth. Ruth was that kind of woman. But of course, the bigger picture is the Redeemer. Christ is our Redeemer. So our key word is Redeemer, and our key verse is a verse that has to do with being blessed because of our Redeemer. Well, you have a wonderful weekend in the Lord, and we'll pick up in the book of Samuel next time.